Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. More than 500,000 Americans are arrested each year for smoking pot. These are ordinary citizens like you and me, whose lives and careers are being needlessly destroyed. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
And distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular audio podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, normalaudiostash.com. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. Welcome back to the Audio Stash today. It is Tuesday, May 1st. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit NORML.org. We have a great show for you here today. Our regular Government at Work segment. We got some music for you here today, along with some NORML event audio from Don Duncan out in California from Americans for Safe Access. Don is a guy who has some involvement actually running medical marijuana dispensaries, and it's a real rare insight to hear him speak. That's here on the Audio Stash today. In tomorrow's program, we'll hear from Dr. Mitch Earlywine from State University of New York and editor of the new book, Pot Politics. Mitch joins us every single Wednesday for his cannabis science segment, and we're going to be dispelling some of this weird reefer madness rhetoric that's out there this week. Mitch is going to give us the real truth about marijuana's effect on the brain and even its effect on people who already have schizophrenia. This is something Mitch has a lot of experience with. He spent his grad school years living in a house with a group of schizophrenic patients, so there's no better person to ask about this subject. Also on Thursday's Audio Stash, we have Dr. John P. Morgan, co-author with Lynn Zimmer of the book, Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts. Dr. Morgan is Professor Emeritus of Pharmacology at City University of New York, and he's one of the few Americans who can really talk about pot potency with any real credibility. And that's why we're going to have him on the show to talk about pot potency. That'll be Thursday with Dr. John Morgan right here on NORML's Daily Audio Stash. But first up today is our Government at Work segment. We look each Tuesday at the different marijuana reform legislation proposals happening in state houses across the country. The best way for you to get involved with reform, and it is so easy, folks. Make those phone calls, send those emails, write those letters to state elected officials, and get them to vote for marijuana reform legislation. There are over a dozen pieces of legislation moving through state houses right now. We have links at normalaudiostash.com with sample letters for you to get involved today. Let's get to Government at Work. Welcome back to another Tuesday Government at Work segment here on the Audio Stash, where we look at different pieces of legislation moving through state houses around the country. First up today, we want to take note that Connecticut's medical marijuana legislation passed the House, and votes are pending this week in Minnesota, Vermont, and Rhode Island. We have links to get involved with the passage of those bills. Again, folks, send those letters, make those calls, send those emails, and urge our elected officials to support marijuana reform legislation. Here on Government at Work today, we're looking at a series of bills being considered in Massachusetts. Joining us today from MassCan NORML in Massachusetts is attorney Steve Epstein. Steve, welcome to the Audio Stash today.
I'm glad to be here.
It's wonderful to have you with us today, Steve. Let's begin here by going over the first of these bills. And this set is to approve medical marijuana in Massachusetts. So what does this legislation propose?
Once again, two bills have been filed concerning medical marijuana in Massachusetts. In the House, with significant sponsorship, is an act amending the Commonwealth's current law regulating the physician-approved use of marijuana for medical purposes by TBH-certified patients. It's modeled after the successful Rhode Island bill that was passed a year ago and creates legal protections for patients with written recommendations from their doctor and the approval of their caregivers and the Department of Public Health. This bill is identical to the legislation that was filed last year and made it to the House Rules Committee after being discharged favorably from the Committee on Public Health, only to die. There's also, filed in the Senate by Thomas McGee, is Senate Bill 944, an act relative to arrest and prosecution for the possession of marijuana for medical purposes. Its primary difference is that DPH approval is not required.
And would there be ID cards under that DPH program?
It'd be the approval only. Ours would be a statewide database. As I guess California has a county or even a local government approval database. We would have a database of those. Under House Bill 2247, you don't get these protections unless your medical marijuana has been approved by the Department of Public Health.
And Steve, would there be dispensaries there?
No dispensaries. There could be individual caregivers who, under both instances, you have to have the marijuana cultivation would have to be in a secured location, and you would have to list who you're as a caregiver. Growing the marijuana, you would have to have identified before you started growing who you were growing it for.
And what kind of response has there been to medical marijuana from the public and officials?
Well, the response by the public is, as it is everywhere, overwhelming. But the representatives of the people don't seem quite yet to get it.
Now, we saw the same type of legislative bureaucracy for years there in New Mexico as well, with it bouncing around then timing out the legislative session until the governor pushed the issue forward. Is Massachusetts waiting for someone like the governor to come along and move this ahead?
It may very well be waiting for that person, or it may be waiting for the doctor out at UMass Amherst. Yeah, it may be waiting for to see where that ball flies. When we were before the committees the last time around, they were all concerned, and these are lawyers, which is a scary thing. They were all concerned that because it's illegal federally, they can't violate the United States Constitution by approving the legislation. And as a lawyer, I scratch my head and go, so dual sovereignty when you want to hurt somebody is okay, but dual sovereignty when you want to help somebody isn't. So I don't know.
So there's some sense here, like other states, that Massachusetts doesn't need to be beholden to the federal viewpoint here.
That's the United States Constitution talking. You don't have to enforce federal prohibitions on marijuana. States don't have to do that. And they can acquiesce and allow their citizens to grow their own marijuana, and there'd be nothing the federal government can do to the state legislature. They can try to prosecute the individuals, as they're doing may ultimately do with Poor Angel, but they can't make the state do anything in that regard. And I don't really consider it libertarian. We get a little bit more libertarian when we get to the decrim legislation.
Now let's talk about the bills that would reduce marijuana penalties overall in Massachusetts. Steve, if you would, outline those bills and what they propose to do.
Well, first I'll read the titles, because there can be a lot told by what's in the title. Filed with the sponsorship of, again, Senator Jalen and Representatives Rushing and Story is Senate Bill 1121, an act to impose a civil fine for possession of marijuana. This is identical to a bill that was passed out favorably from the Joint Committee on Mental Health and Substance Abuse last session. and it eliminates the power of the police to arrest a person for possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana, and punishes that possession of 1 ounce or less with a civil penalty of $250. No person cited under the Act would be required to report to a probation officer or be subject to a criminal record, and the bill has again been referred to the Joint Committee on Mental Health. Filed at my request is Senate Bill 1011, an act to impose a civil fine for the possession of marijuana and for disposition of the fines collected. And Senate Bill 1011 eliminates the power of the police again to arrest for possession of marijuana, punishes possession of those over 18, punishes possession of marijuana by a fine of $100 to $500 for a first offense, $200 to $1,000 for a second offense, and it provides that the fine be split between the state and the municipality in which the offense occurred, as we do here in Massachusetts with motor vehicle violations. And this bill has again been referred to the Joint Committee on Judiciary, where it had a hearing 2 sessions ago, not last session. Both bills would prohibit the use of the marijuana possession offense as the basis for the denial or revocation of any license granted by the Commonwealth, nor a conviction for purposes of any disqualification or for any other purpose, so you wouldn't lose your right to possess and bear arms under the law in the Commonwealth.
Now, Massachusetts does have a $500 fine plus up to 6 months of parole, even jail, just for simple possession.
Yeah, but we are far more liberal state when it comes to how much weight you can have before you become a felon than we are when it comes to just possessing marijuana, because it's very arbitrary right now, and that you don't know what a police officer is going to do when you get captured. You may be released like poor fish with your marijuana poured into the sewer, or just in the officer's pocket without any paperwork and never be prosecuted. Or you may be arrested, or you may be given a piece of paper giving you a right to a clerk magistrate's hearing if you turn it into the court in 3 days. And so, as you might suspect, if you're of color or you're younger, you're more likely to end up with a citation or handcuffs than you are to have your marijuana thrown in the sewer and told to go on your way.
And now, Steve, a lot of folks would consider Massachusetts to be this political liberal enclave of sorts.
Oh, Massachusetts is not the liberal enclave people might think. When it comes to the rights of homosexuals to have marriage, yeah, we're fairly liberal. We're fairly enlightened in that respect. But when it comes to the possession of marijuana, you'd think we were actually one of the decrim states, and we're not.
And when it comes to traditional recreational marijuana smoking, how does the public feel about that in Massachusetts, Steve?
We are number one. Back, I believe, in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, the federal government issued a survey of marijuana use around the state, and Massachusetts is numero uno.
Huh.
Massachusetts, overall estimate for Massachusetts is that based on the, for 1999, 2000, and 2001, persons age 12 or older, Massachusetts overall is 9.14% admitted they used marijuana last month.
Wow. Wow.
And Suffolk County led the way with 12.16%. We know that's a joke because of all the college students there. But we are number one, and we're proud of it.
Now, Steve, you mentioned to me just before we went on the air that ending marijuana prohibition is a civil rights issue. Is that all of our civil rights, or is this just because pot enforcement really comes down much more harshly on people of color?
It's both. Yes, you have a greater chance of being charged, stopped by and having a police encounter if you're a person of color, and if you have marijuana, have the law take its course than you are if you're white. But it's also just a question of civil liberties. We're talking about at least 9% of the population statewide. There are more marijuana smokers in the Commonwealth than there are black Americans. We're only outnumbered slightly by the Asians, if you want to break it down by race. So to stigmatize some 10%, 10% of the population as criminals makes it a civil rights issue.
Steve, this has been a wonderful conversation today. I really do so appreciate you taking time to speak with us here.
Okay.
Many thanks again, Steve. Steve Epstein is with MassCan and NORML in Massachusetts. We have links to their website at normalaudiostash.com. And don't forget, folks, that there are House floor votes in Minnesota, Connecticut, and Rhode Island this week. Get involved today. Call and write these elected officials at normalaudiostash.com. We have all the links you need to get involved right there. Get involved today.
What's up, everybody? This is the infamous Bobby Black from High Times Magazine, and you're listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash. Stay cool.
Our next piece of audio in the stash today comes from NORML's 2006 conference. We're going to hear from Don Duncan, a gentleman who's actually been involved with running medical marijuana dispensaries. And this is the rare type of insight that we'd love to be able to offer you here on NORML's Daily Audio Stash. Now, there are a number of NORML-sponsored events, like the National Conference. This year, it's going to be in October. It's going to be on the West Coast. But before that National Conference, there is the Aspen Legal Seminars, which for the first time are going to be open to the public. We have links for more info about the Aspen Legal Seminars, where you can hear lawyers talk about the latest in marijuana defense, as well as some keynote speakers like Tommy Chong. More information about the Aspen Legal Seminar, which only costs $150 to attend out there in Aspen. More info is available on our website today at normalaudiostash.com. Here's Don Duncan at the 2006 NORML Conference in San Francisco.
Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to the other panelists as well for such good information. My name is Don Duncan. I'm on the board of directors of Americans for Safe Access, and I'm also part of the team that operates 3 medical cannabis dispensing collectives here in California, one in Berkeley, one in West Hollywood, and one just now opened in the heart of Hollywood in Los Angeles itself. In that capacity, with ASIN as a dispensary operator, I've had the opportunity to work with cities and counties all over the state of California on implementation issues. And I can tell you across the state, local governments are grappling with what to do with medical cannabis dispensaries. It's unprecedented in American law how to handle an institution that is illegal under federal law, is very vaguely legal under state law, and has no local guidelines whatsoever to start with. I am happy to say that if you can measure the success of Proposition 215 and of our medical cannabis movement here in California by the expansion of safe access, then it's been a tremendous success. We've gone from 1 dispensary in San Francisco to over 200 statewide. And I'm especially encouraged that we're seeing now a long-awaited proliferation of dispensaries in Southern California, in Los Angeles, in the Inland Empire east of Los Angeles County, even in San Diego, which is arguably the most hostile jurisdiction in the state of California for medical cannabis right now. And that's encouraging. I remember for the longest time there were only dispensaries in Northern California, and it seemed like L.A. never would come along. And now it feels crowded in L.A., and so I think that's a tremendous success. And I don't just mean the traffic either. There are several reasons. In fact, there may be a whole range of reasons why dispensaries are proliferating so quickly. And perhaps the most important is that it's just an idea whose time has come. You know, it's time in this process for those dispensaries. But of course, the factor that's driving in the Southern California and the rural expansion of patients is the increase in the number of new patients in California. We have perhaps 100,000 patients. Estimates vary. At the conference in Santa Barbara 2 weeks ago, there was an estimate of somewhere between 130 and 338,000 patients in California, only about 25% of whom actually have safe access to medical cannabis at this time. And so that huge increase in the number of patients is driving the proliferation of dispensaries in areas where previously the communities were not so supportive. There's also other factors that I think are relevant to the capacity of the dispensaries to serve their patients. And one, I think, is a dissatisfaction. And I don't necessarily mean that in the harshest sense of the word, but a dissatisfaction amongst the patients with what they have. There are some dispensaries, some patients who are dissatisfied with the services and with the medicine that they can find at the dispensaries, and that will often lead them to strike out on their own. And one of the exciting trends we're seeing right now is that individual patients, previously people receiving services, are getting educated, they're getting motivated, and opening their own dispensaries. And that is exactly, it's a wonderful step forward. I actually talk to at least 3 or 4 people every week who want to do that. And we've come now to the point where some of those people have actually opened up and are operating, and now they are helping to train new dispensary operators from their patient base to open new dispensaries. And that is grassroots organizing in its purest form, I think, is people just going out and taking the initiative and doing it. Of course, also driving that proliferation of dispensaries is financial opportunity, and that's both real financial opportunity and perceived financial opportunity. There's a common misconception that anyone who opens up their doors as a dispensary will, of course, be a millionaire by the next week, and that is not the case. And yet, there is medical cannabis is a growth industry in California right now. There are people making a lot of money at it, and that perception of financial opportunity, I think, is also driving the new dispensaries to open, especially in these areas where traditionally they've been less welcome. So the good news about this proliferation of dispensaries is that having new dispensaries open, over 200 and growing here in California. Remember, those are only the 219 that we know about. There are plenty more that we don't know about yet. This means that we're taking medical cannabis and Proposition 215 and making it a reality every single day in the lives of tens of thousands of patients. That's no small thing. California's medical cannabis law is not theoretical or hypothetical. It's real every day in the patient's lives, and that's something to be proud of, and it's something to strive for in the other states. I know we're seeing inklings of that all up and down the West Coast and Colorado and even on the East Coast now, and I think it's a trend we should encourage and support, because those new dispensaries in the other states are going to bring that same safe access and that same reality to those patients, and they're going to take the heat off California, and we could really use that. Now, the bad news about this proliferation of dispensaries is that as the number of dispensaries grows, the challenges facing the local communities, the city councils and the boards of supervisors, are also going to grow. And with the proliferation of dispensaries comes a proliferation of non-compliant and perhaps less desirable dispensaries as well. Sometimes this is the result of ignorance about how best to operate, and sometimes just carelessness. But locals, cities, and counties are now dealing with the issue of how to regulate their dispensing collectives and cooperatives. And they're not going to get any leadership from Sacramento on this issue. And so city by city and county by county, we're going to have to sort that out in a way that's relevant for those communities, that respects the values of those communities, and hopefully in a way that actually protects the patients as well as the neighborhoods in dealing with medical cannabis. The problem with dispensaries that are raising concerns and generating controversy in the community isn't just for the immediate neighbors. The perception that dispensaries are problematic and that they bring criminal activity and nuisance behavior into neighborhoods jeopardizes the credibility of our medical cannabis movement here in California. And it's very, very important for these dispensaries to be good neighbors and good citizens in their communities so that we can facilitate this growth and safe access. The concern that local governments have when I talk to them, the city councils and the boards of supervisors, are not about the big issues. They're not concerned about the Supreme Court case. They're curious, but they're not really hung up on it. They're not concerned about federal law and the larger issues of ethics or morals around self-medication. They're worried about smoking outside. They're worried about litter and graffiti and parking and the other kind of nuisance activities that cause their constituents to call and complain about medical cannabis dispensaries. And what we need to focus on in regulation, I think, is the nuts and bolts operation that is going to make these dispensaries good neighbors and be sure to protect that safe access. There are two aspects, and of course I could go on all day. I'm just going to focus on two aspects of medical cannabis dispensing collectives that I think would go a long way to shoring up that credibility and preventing that kind of nuisance behavior that leads to complaints and to problems in communities. One is the organization of the dispensaries themselves, their sort of legal or structural organization, and the other is what I call the good neighbor policy. Under our state law, there's no explicit protection for a medical cannabis dispensary. It was not anticipated under Proposition 215, or at least it wasn't addressed under Proposition 215, and it's absent from SB 420 explicitly. However, SB 420 does make a space for collectives and cooperatives of patients, and it's a small step from the collective and cooperative of patients to the dispensing collective, where a group of patients and caregivers join together to produce medical cannabis, to package it, to label it, and to provide it back. And in that model, patients would provide to that dispensing collective their excess medication, which would then be provided to the other members who cannot or will not grow their own medicine. And that model that is membership-based and exclusively supplied by patients and caregivers who are members, I think is one that makes local government and neighbors very comfortable. They don't like the idea of Walmarts of cannabis. They're uncomfortable with that. But the idea of a group of patients working together as a closed circuit, isolated from the illicit market, seems to satisfy the mandates of SB 420 and allay the concerns of consumers. You'll find on the front chairs here, I've put out some information. One of the things we've to do is define what a dispensing collective is under SB 420. And this is a work in progress. The information you'll find on this page about medical cannabis dispensing collectives was adapted from a return of property motion filed in a case with a LA dispensary that was shut down. And the attorneys set out to identify what a collective or cooperative was in terms of state law. This very wordy and not terribly elegant adaptation of that return of property motion talks about a collective in which this is made up entirely of patients and caregivers. That's membership-based with a closed membership just to their registered members, where all the supply is internal. And that, I believe, is the sort of legal organization that's going to lead us forward and allay those concerns, at least until the time that there can be some meaningful regulation from the state government or a significant change in federal government. I hope you'll have a look at that. It's not a finished document. That's a work in progress. And so any feedback that you guys can provide on that, I am very eager to have. You'll find contact information at the bottom. Besides being legitimately organized, though, I think we have a behavioral issue that's perhaps even more significant with dispensing collectives and cooperatives. And that is what we talk about as our good neighbor policy. You're going to find down at the front as well a very short booklet called Medical Cannabis in Our Community. This booklet was developed to talk to neighbors about dispensaries because we were finding that the same questions come up again and again. What is a dispensary? Who are the patients? Are they safe and are they legal? And that's what this booklet deals with. It's a layman's discussion, and it is really only the starting point of a conversation, not a authoritative treatise. But I want to talk just briefly about the good neighbor policy, which I think is so important because virtually all of the problems that I have witnessed in dispensaries in California were not from federal law, but from local complaints. And unfortunately, some of those local complaints, because of the values and the policies of local police departments, turned into problems with the federal government when the local law enforcement would contact the DEA and bring them in to bust a dispensary because they didn't feel like they had the tools available to deal with the complaints they were getting. A good neighbor policy, I think, starts with that legal integrity, being legally organized, restricting your membership only to those who are qualified, and taking very real steps to prevent diversion. We can't just pay lip service to legitimacy. We have to be sure that as the dispensaries operate, they are only providing medicine to their members and that they are not allowing, through lack of oversight, members to divert medicine into the illicit market. Whether or not, I personally wish there were no illicit market. If cannabis could just be legal, then of course that wouldn't be an issue. But until it is, we have to have a line, I think, over which dispensaries do not cross.
That was Don Duncan at the NORML 2006 conference in San Francisco. NORML has a number of events throughout the year. The next one is the Aspen Legal Seminar, and Tommy Chong is the keynote speaker there. More information about the Aspen Legal Seminars on our website today at normalaudiostash.com.
755,000. That is a big number to be sure, but do you know what this number represents? It signifies the total number of citizens in America arrested on marijuana charges in 2004. That's right. 755,000 of your fellow citizens were arrested on marijuana charges. That's an arrest every 40 seconds. And 9 out of 10 of those arrested are for possession-only charges. Does continuing marijuana prohibition make sense to you? It certainly does not to the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws and its members. I'm NORML's Executive Director, Alan St. Pierre, and if you too think that it is high time to end marijuana prohibition and replace it with a tax and regulate policy, please join and support NORML's 36-year legislative efforts to reform our country's misguided marijuana laws. You can learn more about NORML or become an active supporter by calling toll-free 888-67-NORMAL, NORML, or by visiting us on the web at NORML.org.
Listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiostash.com. That's NORMLAUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow. Podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redapphid.com.